Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Cruise News Show. I'm your host, Tony, here with the latest cruise news. Well, does the CDC hate cruising? I've heard that opinion bandied around in the comments and in casual conversation with my friends. We're all speculating whether or not the CDC hates cruising. Is it a vendetta against cruising? Is there something nefarious going on? In today's episode, I want to break down a few things. I want to talk about why the CDC has the authority to stop cruising in its tracks. I want to talk about why the CDC hasn't stopped the airlines from flying. I also want to talk about why the CDC issued the conditional sale framework opposed to extending the no-sale order. And then I've got some comments about politics. I'm going to put the politics at the end. If you're somebody who doesn't like to talk about politics, I will give you fair warning at the end. But I do have some strong opinions as to how politics is, well, it's messing up cruising. Let's answer the first question. How come the CDC has the authority to shut down the cruise business? The CDC has the ability to shut down the cruise business because of federal law. Federal law. The federal government derives its authority for isolation and quarantine from the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S. Code 64, Article 64, the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Service is authorized to take measure to prevent entry and spread of communicable disease from foreign countries into the United States and between states. The authority for carrying out these functions on a daily basis has been delegated to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. So what exactly is the CDC's role? Well, under 42 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 70 and 71, CDC is authorized to detain, medically examine, and release persons arriving into the United States and traveling between states who are suspected of carrying these communicable diseases. As part of its federal authority, CDC routinely monitors persons arriving at U.S. land border crossings and passengers and crew arriving at U.S. ports of entry for signs or symptoms of communicable diseases. When alerted about ill passenger or crew member by the pilot of a plane, captain of a ship, CDC may detain passengers and crew as necessary to investigate whether the cause of the illness on board is a communicable disease. The CDC most certainly can do what they are doing. Is this delegated power robust enough to affect the airline industry? If you think about what this regulation's talking about, it seems to be focused primarily on people coming in from outside U.S. borders. There is a provision for state-to-state travel, but the big push of this federal regulation is to stop people coming into the country with a communicable disease. It also goes to some level to the ability to enforce the regulation when it's somebody coming from outside the country that are crossing over our borders either through sea or by land. The CDC has at its disposal the U.S. Borders and Protection Service and the U.S. Coast Guard to enforce these rules. Now, if we get down to a state level, say the CDC, for example, wants to monitor airline flights from Tennessee into the state of Florida, well, then they have to work with local authorities, state authorities, county authorities, and so it gets a little more complex to police interstate travel as it does people coming from out of the country. So let's answer the question, why does it seem that the CDC is harder on the cruise lines than the airline industry? I think it all comes down to authority and enforcement. While they do have the authority to stick their nose in the airline business, I think they would have a much harder time trying to enforce their will, to impose their will on the airline industry opposed to the cruise business. And a second point here, if you look at the information on the CDC website, they definitely see cruising as a greater risk vector than flying. Of course, that is a debatable point, but that is the stance they have taken. And so, yeah, that's why the CDC has authority to do what they do, and that's why they're so hard on the cruise business. The cruise business, they view it as international travel and preventing people from coming into the country, even if they are citizens, coming into the country with the virus that they may have picked up from somebody else on a cruise ship. And the next thing I want to talk about is, why did the CDC just not extend the no-sell order? Why have they put this framework for conditional sailing in place? Well, personally for me, I think it is to extend their ability to influence cruising. It is more robust than just the blanket no-sail order, at least from an oversight perspective. Let me tell you, they address it very plainly in the document for their framework. If you look on page 14 of the framework for conditional sailing, they answer this question for us. They say very plainly that when it came time to either extend the no-sail order on October the 31st or to do something different, they had a few options. They said that the CDC considered alternatives to this framework. One alternative was just to allow cruise ship operators to return to unrestricted passenger operations without any health oversight. This alternative was deemed unacceptable because cruise ship travel is known to contribute to COVID-19 transmission. Furthermore, mild presentations and asymptomatic cases make detection and isolation and quarantine practices challenging absent robust testing. So they looked at it and they said, look, we could just do away with the no-sail order, let the cruise business start back up, but there's no requirement for testing. We know that COVID spreads by people that don't even think they have it because they're asymptomatic. We can't do that. We're still in the middle of this thing. We can't let a business that's essentially a foreign business operate in the United States without any U.S. health oversight. And that's why they decided to do what they did. They said, how can we keep health oversight into cruising, and how can we limit the ability for cruise ships just to start up willy-nilly? How can we make sure that cruising is safe? And that's why you have this conditional framework with all the hoops on a ship-by-ship basis. This is what they decided to do. And so if you want to look at it from at one point before the pandemic, there was legal authority for the CDC to poke their nose in the cruise business. The no-sail order effectively shut down the cruise business, and it gave the CDC enough time to go, look, this is basically a foreign company that we don't have any oversight into, we don't have any reach into. Well, okay, we'll let you sail again, but we're going to put a lot of rules in place using the authority that's been given to us by the federal government so that we can regulate your business. So what's the CDC's motivation? Why are they trying to keep cruising from happening? My personal opinion is the CDC is doing their job. Their mandate is to keep the public safe, and they're accountable to the public. And so cruising is just a small section of the population. There are more non-cruisers, a lot more non-cruisers than there are cruisers. And the cruising has got such a bad name in the media that it's easy for people who are non-cruisers to call them petri dishes and to call them death ships and to call them prisons, all that kind of stuff that's complete nonsense if you have any kind of insight what the cruise business is all about. And so you have a whole public sentiment out there, and they're leaning on the CDC to say, keep us safe in the middle of a pandemic. And these folks, they're like everybody else. They have jobs on the line. Their personal integrity is there. And so why would they cater to a small segment of the population that's a risk vector in their minds? It makes sense to me that they are worrisome about cruising and they want to restrict it to make sure it's as safe as possible. I don't have any beef with that at all. I think the challenge for the cruise lobby, I think the challenge for people that are cruisers is to change the minds of people that don't understand cruising, to demonstrate to them that you can cruise in a safe way. And that's the opportunity that cruising has now with this conditional framework for sailing. The cruise line can demonstrate their protocols. They can demonstrate to the CDC that there is a safe path to sailing, and at least the opportunity is there. So I see the conditional framework better than just a straight no-sail order. And I do believe that the CDC is working with the cruise lines to get cruising started again. I don't see them as the big bad wolf. I don't see them as the villain in this story. I actually see them as the people that are trying to keep people safe in a pandemic. I know not everybody believes in that. So let's transition into the political conversation. I know that everybody doesn't like to talk politics. This is your time to jump out of the video. Please show your support for the show by hitting the like button. The word of the day is authority. Also, before we get into the political discussion, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you do not subscribe to this channel, just like voting, you do not have a say in what goes on in this channel. That's not true. But anyways, I'm inviting you to subscribe to Lido Loca with the notification bell on. That way you don't miss out on any of these updates. Do it. Now let's talk politics. Man, I never knew that having a YouTube channel about cruising would enlighten me so much about how politics is really wreaking havoc in today's world. So many comments on my cruising videos are filled with the talking points that have been laid out by liberal media, by conservative media, talking points. Like, you read these and you know that people didn't come up with this on their own, that they heard it somewhere, and it really speaks to the idea that cruising, the shutdown of cruising, has been run through a political filter, and now it's wrapped in a political wrapper. It just depends which side of the fence you're on, how you're going to talk about it. Let me give you one example. Now that the election is completed and there's some indication that Biden will become president, there's a steady stream of comments on these videos talking about how Biden will shut down cruising. Biden is for shutdown. Trump is for not shut down. Here's a newsflash. Guess who shut down cruising in 2020? It was this current administration. Guess who did not get cruising restarted in 2020? It was this current administration. You may say that the CDC is acting on its own and the administration can't control the CDC. Well, the reality is the vice president, the member of this administration, the head of the coronavirus task force, has a lot of authority. And the best that that guy could do was allow the CDC to have even more regulatory power over the cruise industry. This administration did us no favors. If they really were Billy Big Britches, they would have got the no-sell order dismissed and we would be cruising right now without regulation. That didn't happen. So before you go championing this administration over the next administration, all the next administration has to do is get cruising started again, and they did it better. How about that? This is my point. It's not a political conversation. The virus is not a political conversation. Neither side did anything positive for cruising. You can say, well, this administration leaned on the CDC to get the no-sell go away. Yeah, they leaned on them, but they got even more government oversight stuck into cruising in that process. You can champion one side or the other. I'm not here to pick a side. I haven't talked about which side I picked in the election. I try to stay very in the middle of the road on that. I know I made a lot of Democrats mad with my Democrats hate cruising video, but those people didn't watch the video because that was another conversation about how politics is ruining everything. This is what I see as an observer, as a commentator. The fact that we politicize the response to the coronavirus, we've set our country back. I've said it before, when you run everything through a political filter, you end up with an adversary, and our response to this coronavirus should not be adversarial, citizen versus citizen. It should be solidarity. It should be citizen with citizen, figuring out how we can solve this problem. We need leadership around a unified approach to taking care of the virus. Instead, we got leadership on both sides that made it an adversarial political thing, and you see how that has turned out. And at the end of the day, guess what? Still no cruising. My impassioned plea when it comes to cruising, when it comes to thinking about the CDC, drop your political filter and think of it a different way. I know people aren't going to do that. I know this plea is probably going to fall on deaf ears, but logically, all this stuff that I hear in the comments, it just does not make sense. Nobody's a friend of cruising right now. That's just the way it is. And as long as we let cruising be a political thing, the same way that we're letting the virus be a political thing, we're never going to get anything positive done. That's just my opinion. I would love to hear yours. Let's continue this conversation down in the comments. Again, the word of the day is authority. This is Tony for Lido Loca. Show your support for the show by hitting the like button, and until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido.